Hey guys, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about a concept called AA similarity, where we prove two triangles are congruent based on if we can see two pairs of corresponding angles are congruent, at least. We're going to do this in our learning target using informal arguments to establish facts about triangles being similar this time. Our success criteria, we're going to use those angle relationships. Okay, we've been learning a lot of angle relationships in the past 2 weeks, and we need to make sure we're memorizing them and keeping them straight. Because here we go again, using them to find unknown angles in a figure, just like we have been for a while. We're going to apply the triangle sum theorem in order to do this, and the exterior angle theorem to find any unknown angles. And we're also going to determine if two triangles are similar using this AA similarity. When we say AA, that means we've proven using something of the above that two corresponding angles of the two triangles are congruent, and thus the triangles are similar. So the key idea here is if two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then the triangles are similar. So if we take a look at this first figure, we can actually break it apart. Okay, so this figure here, we can actually break it apart into two overlapping triangles. Okay, so we can see if we take those two overlapping triangles apart, we have angle A being shared between both triangles. Now it may seem redundant, but we can say that angle A is congruent to itself, angle A. And that proves that one of the angles is congruent. We need two. Okay, so we have one listed, one pair of angles congruent. Well, we already had marked B and B prime with the double arcs, which also shows you that they are congruent to each other. So angle B is congruent to angle B prime. So that's two angles are congruent. Two sets, I should say. Okay, that's what we need. Okay, these two prove that two angles are congruent in each, which tells us that the two triangles are similar. So ABC is going to be similar to A prime, B prime, C prime. Okay, so let's take a look at the first example. It says, is triangle ABC similar to triangle DEF, and justify your reasoning. Now, when you first look at these two triangles, you may think, if the rule is that you need two corresponding angles, I only really see one pair of corresponding angles that are congruent. I can see that angle B is congruent to angle E. But 77 degrees is not the same as 45. However, A doesn't correspond to F. A corresponds to D. So maybe if we found the measure of angle D, it may match what the measure of angle A is. So we need to use the triangle sum theorem. So we have 58 plus 45 plus the measure of angle D equals 180 degrees. 58 plus 45 is 103 plus the measure of angle D is equal to 180. So now we need to subtract 103 from each side of the equation to solve for the measure of angle D. So I'm getting the measure of angle D is equal to 77 degrees, which we can now see that angle A is 77, so is angle D, so angle A is congruent to angle D. Because we have two corresponding congruent angles, that means that the two triangles are similar. This little 3 dots, that means therefore. So we draw the conclusion because the two sets of angles are congruent, therefore triangle ABC is similar to triangle DEF. Let's have you give this a try in your first U-try. I just want to know, are these two triangles similar? And I want you to justify your reasoning by showing me two sets of angles are congruent to each other. If you cannot find two sets of angles that are congruent, then you cannot conclude that these two triangles are similar. I wouldn't right, so let's take a look at a second example where maybe not as many real numbers are known in the triangles, but maybe we are just told that two angles are congruent. So it says, can you conclude that triangle ABC is similar to triangle DEC and justify? Well, the arcs that are already marked say that angle A is congruent to angle D. So that's one of the two pairs of congruent angles that we need to say that these two triangles are similar. Well, I need one more. Well, I don't know any of the angle measurements, but I can identify some angle relationships like vertical angles are congruent no matter what. It doesn't matter if the lines, if you have a set of parallel lines cut by a transversal, if you see an X formation where the lines are straight, then vertical angles are congruent. Now we just need to be careful because we can't just call these angles angles C. I won't know if you're talking about this one, this one, this one, or this one. So I need to name them with 3 letters. So the one up here is going to be called angle ACB. And that's going to be congruent to the one down here, which is angle DCE. So that's 2 sets of corresponding angles being congruent. So we can then conclude, okay, so therefore triangle ABC is similar to triangle DEC by AA similarity. Okay, so let's have you guys give this a try in your second U-try. Can you conclude the two triangles are not congruent? Can you conclude that they're similar? And you need to justify your reasoning. So tell me 2 angles, 2 pairs of angles that are congruent, as well as that they are similar by AA similarity. All right, I've got one more example for you, and I would say anytime you see these shapes kind of overlapping, to draw them again but split apart so that maybe you can identify any angles that they have in common. So we're just trying to figure out if PRQ and NRL are similar. So this triangle here, okay, and this triangle here. Okay, they're overlapping each other. Okay, so I'm actually going to draw them separated out. Don't have to be perfect about your sketch. Okay, but I'm also going to label what each of them are. So I have R, Q, and P. And then I also have R, L, and M. And that crisscross there, that creates an M angle, which we don't see when we unfold them. So angle L is going to be 43 degrees and angle Q is going to be 43 degrees, which makes them congruent to each other. So angle L is congruent to angle Q. Now we only need one more angle to be congruent in order to say these two triangles are similar, and you can actually use the angle that they both have in common, which is angle R. Okay, angle R can be congruent to itself. Okay, that's actually called the reflexive property, that something can be congruent to itself. So therefore, triangle PRQ is similar to triangle NRL. Okay, and when we explain why or why not, we can say by angle-angle similarity. Let's have you give this a try in your third and final U-try. Again, it may help if you draw the same figure but have the 2 overlapping triangles separated out. Give it a try. All right, I just got two last questions for you that I want you to answer on your own in the Ed Puzzle, and I will look through them as I grade your video score. So please make sure if you're confused, ask questions when you have them and get the help you need. Alrighty, so we went through all of our success criteria today. We used angle relationships to help find unknown angles in order to get to that angle-angle similarity. That was in example 1 and 2. And then we applied the triangle sum theorem and the exterior angle theorem. Not so much the exterior angle theorem this lesson, but we really did apply the triangle sum theorem that was in example 1. But you may also have to use the exterior angle theorem in this situation as well. We also determined if two angles were similar. That was the overall key idea here by the AA similarity theorem, where we had to find two pairs of congruent angles to say that the two triangles were similar. That was in all three examples. Okay, so go ahead and rewatch any sections you may need clarity on, ask questions, and you may start your homework.